Hey guys, it's Betty from bakerbettie.com and welcome to day 2 of getting your sourdough starter going. Now, if you're new to this series, you need to make sure you go back and watch the other videos. I will link the playlist below, but hopefully if you are here, you have already watched day 1 and you already have a container of sourdough starter going. So we are on to day 2, and now what we need to do today is do our first feeding. So if you look at your starter today, you might already start seeing some bubbles in the starter. I see just a few bubbles in mine. So if you see a lot of bubbles, that's normal. If you see no bubbles, that's normal. If you see a few bubbles, it's also normal. Everybody's starter is going to look a little bit different, and it's just kind of depending on the flour that you used, the environment you live in, your water, a lot of different factors, because there's going to be different yeast and different bacteria available for your starter. And depending on your environment, it might start fermenting a lot faster or slower. Now, when I'm looking at mine, I actually see a bit of liquid forming on top, and it has a bit of a brown or gray or almost kind of black cast to the color of that liquid. Now, this is normal. It is called hooch, and the fermentation that's happening in your starter is creating both alcohol and gases. So the hooch is actually a byproduct of the alcohol creation in your starter. So if you have a lot of liquid, you can just pour it off. Mine is just a tiny bit, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. It's not harmful for your starter, and it's actually a sign that your starter is alive, but it's also a sign that your starter is hungry. So we need to feed it. So what we're going to do today is we are going to discard all but 25 grams of what we have left in our container. And then we're going to do the same feeding as we did yesterday. 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of warm water. Now, the reason why we need to discard some of this is if we were to feed this total amount enough flour and water for it to have enough food, our starter would just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time we fed that. So we're trying to reduce the amount of flour wasted. There's no need to keep that much of it around. So we're going to throw away all but 25 grams of this. And this is why I wanted you to take the weight of your jar yesterday. So if you remember, my jar weighed 684 grams. So I need my jar to weigh 709 grams, which would equal 25 grams of my starter. So 684 plus 25 would equal 709. So whatever the weight of your jar is plus that 25 grams of starter is what you are going to want your jar to weigh. So I've turned my scale on here and it's at 0. I'm going to set my jar on top, and I'm going to remove enough of this that it will equal 709 grams. Now, down the road, I am going to show you how you can keep and use your sourdough discard, but at this early in the process, it's really not worth keeping. It's not strong enough to really have a lot of flavor or to be used in a sourdough discard recipe. So I'm actually just going to throw that away. You don't want to pour it down your drain. You can either compost it or throw it away at this point. Now later on I will give you more uses for it so you're not throwing so much flour away. But that's actually why I start my starter with such a small amount of flour, is I don't want to throw too much away. Okay, so the total weight of my jar now is 709 grams, which means there is 25 grams in my jar. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but it is a very small amount. So now what we're going to do is add 50 grams of whole wheat flour and 50 grams of water at about 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and zero out my scale. So it's no longer weighing the jar and the starter. And I'm adding 50 grams of that flour in. Now, if you go slightly over or slightly under, it's not a big deal, but you just want to make sure you're doing equal amounts water and flour. That's what's the most important part. Okay, now I'm going to zero out my scale one more time, and I'm going to add the 50 grams of the water that's about 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Perfect. Okay, and just like yesterday, now we are just going to stir this together. And again, you want to be a little bit vigorous with it because there is yeast and bacteria in the air, and if you're kind of vigorous with it, you're going to incorporate some of that into your starter, which is what we want. Okay, and once you make sure all of those dry patches are incorporated, all of that flour is hydrated, you can kind of go around your jar, scrape it down a little bit. But you know, if there's some of it stuck onto the sides of the jar, it's not to worry. It's going to be okay. We will eventually change this into a new jar down the road. But for now, we're going to keep everything in the same jar because this jar is where we are really trying to build that active sourdough culture. There is a lot of bacteria and yeast just living on the jar itself because we are building it in here. So we don't really want to change it to a new jar at this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my lid on it. And again, you don't want your lid to be airtight. I have removed the rubber seal from my lid, so it sits loosely on top. And now we're just going to wait until tomorrow where we feed it again. So again, you want to be doing this about at the same time every day, and I'm actually going to mark my jar to see where it is when I fed it and see if there's any growth tomorrow. Now this is more important to do down the road when our starters are more strong, but it's kind of fun to see if there's any growth in the beginning as well. So I actually put a piece of tape on my jar, and I'm going to use a marker to just mark right on that tape where the starter is in the jar. And then tomorrow we'll be able to see if it grew above that. And that's always really fun to see. So let me know if you have any questions at this point in the process. And have you named your starter yet? Your starter is a living being. It's a living culture. So you've got to give it a name. My starter that I've had going for a long time, his name is Millie, and I haven't named this one yet. So if you have a suggestion for my new starter, go ahead and leave that down in the comments. And I can't wait to hear how it is going for you. And that's it. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.